This will be your very first time to Singapore. Are you looking forward to it?
Yes, very much so. My only other experience of Asia is the many trips I made to Japan, playing concerts there, and I'm sure Singapore will be a completely different cup of tea, as it were. I'm not much of a tourist though, so I think I'm more interested in knowing how people live on a hot, humid island, and the whole idea of a city-state and such a small area is completely fascinating to me. People always talk about the food, so I'm quite interested to have a few good meals there while I'm in Singapore. And of course, yes, there's the recital too, right? So yes, I'm looking forward to the whole experience, and I already have 1 or 2 friends in Singapore, so that should be quite fun.
You've had a string of rave reviews for several recordings you've made in the last few years, and you've received unanimous praise for mainly finding fresh, unique ways of music people are already very familiar with, such as the complete Mozart sonatas which you recorded. So in light of the fact that so much of this great music we often listen to these days has been played and recorded to death by many pianists, past as well as present, how do you find having something new to say about the same music? How do you approach a score for the first time when you're preparing it for recording or for a concert?
So let me try to answer that fully. First of all, about the reviews, I think you're being rather flattering. I don't think I've ever done a piece of work for which there haven't been quite polarized opinions. And in a way, that's more fun to me. It's true, I've had some sort of love and hate reviews, which suits me quite well. I am quite interested in the reviews, I have to say, because it's very interesting to me what people think about something to which I've committed myself so much and in which I've immersed myself so much. And then when you air it to the public or to other people, it's always quite interesting to know what they think and how it comes across to them. Recently I've started to put good and bad reviews on my website, and I think I will continue to do so. I think it's quite interesting. And of course there's always the whole issue of good reviews that you don't agree with, right? So when you get the kind of compliments that you don't particularly want, or where you think the reviewer didn't really get it. But then I think there's a cautionary note in there, because I think there's quite a lot of amateurish reviewing going on these days, and I think people should just I think they should look into the musical credentials of a reviewer as well as their journalistic credentials to make sure they know what they're reading, you know. But okay, regarding my approach to the classics, the repertoire I love to play, I would say that I don't particularly try to do something new or something different with it. I would just say that I'm perhaps a bit skeptical about some of the pedagogical mores, some of the attitudes that are often bandied about when talking about performances of these works. I do quite a bit of teaching, so I've got a lot of first-hand experience of how limiting some of these things can be. For example, if you think about yourself as an interpreter, you are very likely to have an over-reverent attitude and often a kind of literalist attitude to the text, which is in many cases, of course, actually unhistorical in a sort of paradoxical way. Another thing that keeps cropping up is this obsession with style and things like structure and form. Now, of course, musical works have their shape, but using the word structure, using the word form all the time engenders a certain kind of behavior in people. I find that if you use those words too much and not try to replace them sometimes with other words, you find that you buy into a kind of architectonic metaphor, which is all about straight lines, geometrical angles, hard materials, and that actually, I think, engenders a lot of the type of performances we, for example, hear of architectonic composers like Beethoven, right? And all the sort of mathematical language we hear in relation to Bach. I think it leads to a certain kind of playing. The other thing I'm very interested in to explore in my playing, and which I'm constantly learning new things about, would be to look at the wide-ranging expressive vocabularies that you find when you explore all the different performance traditions that a composer like Bach or Mozart has. I particularly, at some point earlier in my studies, I was very interested in period performance, of course, and also very much in the kind of practices that performers engaged in, fascinatingly, especially between the two world wars, where there's a whole different kind of expressivity. And when one really looks into it, one discovers many of the pianistic tools that are being used that now have been slightly that have fallen slightly out of fashion. I don't think I subscribe particularly to any of these practices. In addition to them, I guess you have the kind of digital expectations that came with the sort of binary age. Again, I wouldn't say I particularly subscribe to any of these things in a dominant way, but each of them has expressive tools that they provide for us, which we can use. The big challenge is, of course, how do you deal with all these diverse tools? How do you fashion your own language for playing in a sort of coherent way? And that's, of course, a challenge to which there is no simple solution.
Daniel-Ben, you've chosen Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier for your program for the Singapore International Piano Festival. So tell us more about your choice and what you see in the music.
Yes, I guess it's not, on the surface, looking at a program like that, it's not the most audience-friendly thing to choose, but I think I just wanted to come and play music which I totally believe in. And I totally believe going through that whole journey of all the 24 keys in the incredibly various way that Bach does, I think it can make for a wonderful evening. Actually, the choice for Singapore was more practical than anything else, because I'm playing both books this year. I guess the most important date later in the year after Singapore is at King's Place in London, where there's a year-long Bach festival, and they asked me to come and play the Well-Tempered Clavier for them on 2 consecutive nights. Can you believe it? So that's a bit of an ask, right? So the choice for Singapore was partly practical, but of course I wouldn't play that music unless I really believed in it. In addition to playing the 48 this year, I've been recording the last few months, since September last year, I've been recording the Beethoven sonatas, which is the whole other side of the canon, isn't it? There's this sort of New Testament, Old Testament imagery that's always used. And in a sense, I wanted to keep the 2 projects separate, my live Well-Tempered Clavier and my studio Beethoven. I've been leading this strange double existence, often spending late nights editing up the Beethoven sonatas, then waking up the next morning to practice my preludes and fugues and to go in and teach. The thing about the Beethoven is that I'm also editing my own recordings, so it is an incredible commitment of time, and sometimes a sort of microscopic way of looking at your own playing through editing that's not always very comfortable, and takes a great deal of sometimes courage. I have to sometimes force myself to do it. but I guess that's in keeping with the confrontational nature of Beethoven in the case of this project. So it's been very interesting. I've recorded and edited 27 of those sonatas up to this date. And in that whole context, going back to the 48 this year, which I recorded 10 years ago, going back to that has been, by contrast, going back to a familiar friend, a strong contrast to the struggles of the Beethoven. The Bach, I just feel, is the most natural, most musicianly music in the world. I'm perhaps even a greater fan of Book 2 than of Book 1. I think Book 2 is incredibly rich. In some ways, I think it's more evasive because it's more dense, it's more complicated than Book 1. And actually, not that many people are familiar with all of Book 2. Book 1 makes for a great concert experience, I think, because there's such a big contrast between short vignette-like pieces and more extended essay-like pieces that are more exploratory. And every now and then in Book 1, there's an obviously very monumental statement, like the C-sharp minor fugue, the big brilliant G major fugue, the great A minor and B minor fugues, and fantastic virtuoso preludes. So it makes for an entertaining evening, I think, contrary to what the program might look like when you get.
So it's not necessarily going to be a boring program, as on first look the uninitiated might think.
Yeah, well, you see, there's this unfortunate stereotype with Bach's music that it's intellectual, and really that's not the whole story. In a sense, when you talk about a figure like Bach, what makes him so great is not particularly his intellect, it's the fact that with this intellect he has such an incredible store of fantasy. And often when you get closer to the music, you realize just how bizarre some of the things are that he does. And that sort of free associational quality that there is. Sometimes you think he's going to, in a very disciplined way, follow through a certain contrapuntal idea, but no, he throws it out the window and does something quite extraordinarily risky. And it's that aspect that I think, if you're not very familiar with Bach, that sometimes passes people by. And you get a lot of Bach playing that passes that fantasy element by, I think.
So, tell me, harpsichord versus the piano. Obviously, Bach's music was written for a much older instrument, much more limited instrument, but also challenging in its own way. Will you try to recreate that on the piano, or what's your view on that?
You see, the lovely thing about playing Bach on the piano is that you know you're doing the wrong thing, right? It was obviously not written for an instrument really like that, and no matter how hard people would argue that Bach would have liked the piano, or that Bach saw the first sort of prototypes of the instrument, let's face it, it wasn't written for the piano. It wasn't written for an instrument with that kind of articulation, that kind of resonance. So you are forced to reinvent Bach for the piano. It's effectively an arrangement. And that's no disrespect to Bach. I think that is the highest compliment you can pay Bach, is to make him your own. And the piano gives you that opportunity. Yes, mimicking harpsichord textures, being aware of what they're like, that's certainly part of the toolbox, but it's by no means the whole toolbox. So I think there is a school of Bach playing which is all about reducing means. Don't use the pedal, don't play loud dynamics, this kind of thing. I think that's a reduction of possibilities, and I wouldn't want to do that playing Bach. Yeah, but who makes those rules? I mean, Feinberg uses the pedal, and I love his recording. So.
Right.
Edwin Fischer uses the pedal.
Yeah, true. Okay.
So there are proven examples of people using the pedal that are absolutely compelling and wonderfully poetic and great. Edwin Fischer, Feinberg, right? So I don't think anybody can make a rule about what an artistic endeavor, what sort of tools an artist, if the pianist is an artist, what tools they should use. I don't really think of my playing of these pieces as an interpretation as such. I mean, I think of these big cycles and the sort of great repertoires. I think of them as in a way as language, right? And as sort of encyclopedias of utterance or panoramas, whole panoramas of human experience, right? So I don't think that I particularly have a set interpretation, and that my interpretation now is so different. I think the basic tenets for me of playing Bach has essentially remained the same, but I hope that my language for playing Bach has evolved and changed a little bit, the way I've probably changed over the last 10 years. But I'm not trying particularly for my reading to be different. If in some of the cases I seem to have a very different view of one of the pieces, it's not really that I've decided to do it differently now. It's more that maybe it's more that an inherent possibility in the piece that always used to be there maybe has come a little bit to the fore. And maybe you will find that if somebody didn't know my earlier performance was the earlier one. I've made a new recording of Book 1 in April, but if they, for example, didn't know which one was first, maybe they will say that an inherent possibility in the new recording came to the fore in the old recording, right? So it's that sort of interchangeability of things, and often maybe a later version is just another expression of the same idea. It's not necessarily that I now have a different interpretation. It doesn't feel like that to me. It's more like a prism which you may move and the light falls through at a different angle, something like that.
Is there a particular composer or piece or style of writing that appeals to you more than others, and for which you think you have a more natural affinity?
That question. I think if you look at the repertoire that I tend to play and the repertoire that I have in my that I've learned, I would probably have to say that I've kind of learned the repertoire I want to learn, and that my big task is now to learn how to play it better, right? I have cycles of works by Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, quite a bit of Chopin, complete Orlando Gibbons, weirdly, some might say, and quite a bit of just a smattering of 19th century works. That's where my center of interest really lies. If I have to say that the Viennese classics and Bach, the reason why I'm probably more interested in them than any other musics is that you're not really just playing Bach or Beethoven. You are also playing all the other people that have engaged with the music and, in a way, added overtones to it. If you think of the Bach as a kind of ground tone, and then people like Fischer or Feinberg or the writers, or maybe all the composers that have been influenced by Bach or to whom Bach has been important. The classics are a brilliant sort of stage for those dramas of influence and resonance through the ages. So engaging with the classics is a way to engage actually with big parts of human culture and human history, and that's what I think is so moving about it. So in a way, I'm completely not a purist when it comes to the way I approach those things. So
is that music that you will think you will never play?
Yeah, quite a lot actually. Most obviously springs to mind Rachmaninoff. I love listening to Rachmaninoff, especially when it's played by Rachmaninoff himself and of course by Horowitz. But I just have no desire to play it myself. There are reasons for that, for which I won't go into. Charles Rosen wrote about some of those reasons. I'm not a natural fan of Liszt, although every time I listen to something by Liszt or I look at some music by Liszt, I realize just how extraordinary he is in so many ways, and how surprising and how much fantasy there is, and invention. Ravel I admire greatly, but I think it's been overexposed by conservatoire pianists and pianists on the competition circuits and the young artist scheme circuits. pieces like Gaspar have been so overplayed, and you could say the same of almost any piano concerto that's any good. That's the problem with piano concertos. The big exception is the Mozart and the Bach concertos. If I was going to play any concertos, I would like to play those. I would like to play more Grieg, more Debussy, maybe more Bartok. I don't know if I ever will. Definitely more Brahms. Yes, I love Brahms. I have the Handel variations, some of the late pieces like Opus 118. I don't particularly want to play the sonatas, but I would like to play more of the late pieces, and I think the Handel variations are a great piece. I also play this D minor variations, which are an arrangement of the sextet, slow movement.
Oh, right.
That's very beautiful.
Right. Do you play
chamber music? The chamber music,
chamber
of course,
music,
yeah, the chamber music is great.
Mm.
I've played the violin sonatas, the cello ones.
Mm. Mm.